It's Walt Disney's Winnie the Pooh in Frankenpooh. It was just the sort of crisp, sparkling autumn afternoon in the 100-acre wood that filled Piglet's heart with a story bursting to be told. Inside the little pig's house, Tigger leaped out of the overstuffed armchair he was sitting with Rabbit and Gopher. He bounced over to where Piglet was standing, trying to tell his tale. "Is it a ghost story full of spookables and horrible creatures?" Tigger asked, clutching himself in a delightful tingle of terror. "Or is it about a mad scientist type?" "Oh no," Piglet protested. "Not mad at all. Quite happy and cheerful, really." Then, clearing his throat carefully, he began the story. Once upon a time. Tigger listened for a moment and then interrupted Piglet. "Say, it's broad daylight. Even a not-so-scary story has to happen at night, you know." At last, the picture in Piglet's head of a beautiful castle on a bright summer's day suddenly grew dark and stormy. "Oh dear," he murmured to himself. "And," Tigger continued, "a nice thunderstorm wouldn't hurt the story either." But Piglet wasn't ready to give up on his happy tale. He had a story to tell, and he was going to tell it his way, if no one minded very much. Piglet thought about what glorious snacks he could whip up in a spotlessly neat and busy buzzing laboratory if he were a pleasant and very cheerful scientist. He wasn't a bit mad. He wasn't even slightly annoyed. Not even at Tigger. Piglet said as he imagined the scientist holding the dripping sandwich. "Peanut butter and jelly, my favorite. And oh, so very good for you, too." Gasp! Tigger suddenly interrupted Piglet's thoughts. "What is it?" Piglet shouted. "What is it?" "If you're going to tell a story about a scientist," Tigger continued, "he ought to be doing something terrible, like creating a boogly monster." "A monster?" Piglet answered in a tiny, not very hopeful that the story was going to go his way sort of voice. "Yeah, the monster Frankenpooh." The scientist looked at Frankenpooh with mixed feelings. "Pooh, a monster?" "Yeah," Tigger continued. "That's absolutely perfect. Only he ought to be bigger than that." All at once, Frankenpooh grew bigger and bigger and bigger, until the very small scientist felt very small indeed. "Now that's what I call a monster," Tigger cried. "Hoo-hoo-hoo!" "Oh, bother," the giant Frankenpooh sighed. After much thinking and scratching of his oversized ears, the monster Frankenpooh reached his monstrous conclusion. "I want honey," he announced in a voice so loud he surprised himself. And he went looking for a not-so-small smackerel of something sweet to eat. "Honey," he announced again, just because he liked the sound of it. "And the monster Frankenpooh," Tigger said, "went looking high and low for whatever it is a monster Frankenpooh looks for." "Honey," Frankenpooh boomed. "And the villagers skedaddled for life and lumber," Tigger continued. "Trembling in your socks, aren't you? Clinging to the edge of your seats? But there's no stopping the gigantical monstrosity." everybody's up to their necks in arms," Tigger added dramatically, "because they knew who it was that was responsible for the horriblest monster that was terrifying them." "Help!" the scientist yelled. "Stop the story, please. It was an accident. I didn't mean to do it. I just wanted it to be a nice, not-so-scary story." Piglet opened his eyes to discover himself back in the hearth of his very own fireplace, surrounded by his good friends Tigger, Rabbit, and Gopher. "But Piglet," Tigger soothed, "it was nothing to get so upset about." "It was just a silly story," Gopher whistled. "Of course, Piglet," Rabbit added gently. "There was no monster, and no one's angry at you." Piglet looked around in great relief. "No?" he asked in a very small voice. "No," his friends all assured him at once. Tigger jumped up to give Piglet a big hug. After Tigger, Rabbit, and Gopher had settled Piglet in his favorite armchair and given him a cup of his favorite hot chocolate, Rabbit put his arms comfortingly around Piglet's very small shoulder. "Stories are just stories. You really should learn the difference between what is real and what isn't," Rabbit told him gently. "Shouldn't he, Pooh?" "Pooh?" "Yes, Piglet," the very large and Frankenpooh-looking bear responded. "You really should, and so should I." And with that, Frankenpooh settled down to get the story straightened out in his head full of fluff, and returned to the sort of Pooh Bear his friends loved so dearly.